The crying started exactly 47 minutes into the flight, a soft whimpering that gradually crescendoed into a desperate wail that no one on board could logically explain. Captain Richard Mercer, a 57-year-old veteran pilot with over 23,000 flight hours, initially dismissed it as the typical sounds of aircraft hydraulics or cabin pressure adjustments. But then the crying became unmistakable, the distinct, primal sound of a newborn infant in distress, coming from somewhere in the sealed cargo hold 37,000 feet above the North Atlantic Ocean. "I've been flying commercial jets for 32 years, Captain Mercer would later tell investigators, his voice cracking as he spoke, "and I've never heard anything that made my blood run cold like that sound." The experienced pilot's hands trembled slightly as he recounted the events, something the three separate investigators noted in their reports. It wasn't just that there was crying from a sealed, pressurized compartment where no living thing should be. It was that somehow, on some level I couldn't understand, I recognized that cry. What happened on Transatlantic Airways Flight 2237 on November 14, 2022, defies conventional explanation and challenges our understanding of reality itself. The cargo manifest listed 47 pieces of luggage, 6 crates of electronics, and 3 specialized containers carrying temperature-sensitive pharmaceutical supplies. No animals. No humans, nothing that could produce the desperate, plaintive cries that soon became audible not just to the flight crew, but to passengers seated in the rear of the aircraft. The flight had departed London Heathrow at 10:42 p.m., destined for Boston Logan International Airport. Weather conditions were ideal, with clear skies and minimal turbulence. By all accounts, it should have been a routine overnight transatlantic crossing. Captain Mercer and First Officer Elena Vasquez had completed their pre-flight checks with characteristic thoroughness. The cargo had been loaded, secured, and verified by ground personnel with proper security clearances. The pressurized cargo hold had been sealed and locked according to standard procedure. Yet 47 minutes after takeoff, as the Boeing 787 Dreamliner reached cruising altitude, flight attendant Sophia Chen was the first to hear it. A sound so out of place that she initially thought she was hallucinating from fatigue. "It was unmistakable," Chen said. "I've got 3 children of my own. That was a newborn's cry, the kind when they're hungry or scared or in pain. And it was coming from beneath us, from the cargo hold." Chen immediately reported what she'd heard to the flight deck. Captain Mercer instructed her to verify the sound wasn't coming from a passenger's electronic device or perhaps a doll in someone's carry-on luggage. After confirming no infants were listed on the passenger manifest for this flight, Chen returned to the rear galley where the sound was most audible. That's when 2 passengers, seated in row 34, approached her with concerned expressions. "Do you hear that?" asked passenger Daniel Okafor, a pediatric surgeon returning from a medical conference in London. "That's definitely a baby crying, and it sounds like it's coming from beneath us." First Officer Vasquez initially suggested they might be hearing some sort of mechanical noise that mimicked human crying, a phenomenon occasionally reported in aviation. Captain Mercer agreed this was the most logical explanation and instructed the flight crew to continue monitoring the situation while he contacted company maintenance via secure radio for consultation. But the crying didn't stop. In fact, it intensified over the next 17 minutes, becoming more desperate and more distinctly human. Dr. Okafor, who had now been invited to the rear galley to listen more carefully, was adamant. "That is unquestionably a human infant in significant distress. I've heard thousands of crying babies in my career. There is no mechanical sound that could replicate the nuance of those cries." It was at this point that Captain Mercer made the unusual decision to personally investigate. While First Officer Vasquez took control of the aircraft, Mercer accessed the emergency cargo hold inspection hatch, a small portal that allows limited visual inspection of portions of the forward cargo compartment. This action, while not explicitly prohibited, deviated from standard operating procedures, which dictate that cargo holds remain sealed throughout flight except in cases of suspected fire. What Captain Mercer saw through that small inspection port has become the subject of intense debate, multiple investigations, and countless theories ranging from the scientific to the supernatural. According to his initial statement, recorded just 4 hours after landing in Boston, he observed nothing unusual through the port, just the expected cargo, properly secured with netting, exactly as it should be. Yet the crying continued, seeming to emanate from the center of the forward cargo compartment, from a section not visible through the inspection port. And that's when Captain Mercer experienced what he would later describe as a moment of complete and utter certainty that defied all logic. "I knew that cry," he told investigators, his voice barely audible on the recording. "Not in the way you recognize a type of sound. I knew that specific cry. I had heard it before, 30 years ago, for just a brief moment before my son was taken away." Here, we must pause the chronology of Flight 2237 to provide crucial context about Captain Richard Mercer's personal history, details that transform this from merely an unexplained aviation incident into something far more disturbing. In 1992, 30 years before this flight, Richard Mercer was a 27-year-old junior pilot for a regional carrier. His wife, Catherine, had given birth to their first child, a boy they named James, at Northside Hospital in Atlanta. The delivery had been complicated, and immediately after birth, the infant was whisked away by medical staff for what they described as routine emergency procedures. It was the only time Mercer ever saw or heard his son. Hours later, hospital administrators informed the devastated couple that their newborn had died from unexpected complications. Most disturbing of all, when the Mercers asked to see their child's body to say goodbye, they were told that due to a procedural error, their son's remains had already been processed and were unavailable for viewing. No death certificate was ever provided. No autopsy was performed. The hospital later settled a lawsuit with the Mercers out of court, with all records sealed by judicial order. For 3 decades, Richard Mercer had lived with not only the grief of losing his child, but also the lingering suspicion that he had never been told the full truth about what happened that day. His marriage didn't survive the tragedy. He threw himself into his career, eventually becoming one of Transatlantic Airways' most respected senior captains. And now, 30 years later, he found himself 37,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, listening to what he swore was the same cry he had heard briefly in that delivery room 3 decades earlier. As impossible as it seemed, Captain Mercer became convinced that his son, who would now be 30 years old, was somehow in that cargo hold, not as an adult, but as the newborn that had been taken from him. The implications were so absurd, so completely divorced from rational thought, that Mercer hesitated to voice his suspicions to anyone else on the aircraft. The crying continued for another 23 minutes. Multiple passengers had now heard it, and a sense of unease spread throughout the cabin. Flight attendants did their best to reassure concerned travelers, offering explanations ranging from unusual air circulation sounds to the possibility of an animal that had somehow been loaded without proper documentation. At 12:17 a.m. UTC, 58 minutes after the crying was first reported, Captain Mercer made a decision that would later be scrutinized by aviation authorities and psychological experts alike. He contacted Boston Air Traffic Control and requested priority handling for an expedited approach, citing a potential medical situation in the cargo hold. He did not declare an emergency, which would have triggered a more extensive response protocol, but his request was granted due to his seniority and perfect safety record. What happened next has been pieced together from flight recorder data, witness statements, and subsequent investigations. As the aircraft began its descent toward Boston, the crying abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was, in its way, even more unsettling than the inexplicable crying had been. Passengers who had been disturbed by the sound now found themselves disturbed by its absence. First Officer Vasquez, who had maintained a calm, logical approach throughout the incident, noted in her statement that Captain Mercer's behavior changed markedly after the crying ceased. "He became extremely agitated," she reported. "He kept mumbling, 'He's there, I know he's there.' I was concerned about his fitness to continue commanding the aircraft and was prepared to take over if necessary." The aircraft landed safely at Boston Logan at 1:22 a.m. local time. Captain Mercer executed a textbook landing despite his apparent distress. As soon as the aircraft reached the gate, before even completing shutdown procedures, Mercer unstrapped from his seat and rushed from the flight deck, another serious protocol violation that would later be noted in the official investigation. Security camera footage from the terminal shows Captain Mercer running down the jet bridge, pushing past surprised gate agents, and sprinting through the arrival hall toward the ground operations area. He used his crew credentials to access the secure zone where cargo was being unloaded from the aircraft. Ground crew supervisor Terrence Washington was overseeing the cargo unloading when Captain Mercer arrived, out of breath and clearly agitated. He kept saying we needed to open all the containers immediately, Washington recalled. He was insistent there was a baby in the cargo. We all thought he'd lost his mind. Washington attempted to calm the captain, explaining that all cargo containers were equipped with pressure and oxygen sensors that would have triggered an alert if any living thing were inside. These sensors had registered no anomalies throughout the flight. Furthermore, all cargo had passed through multiple security screenings, including X-ray and, in some cases, physical inspection before loading. He wouldn't listen to reason, Washington said. He started opening containers himself, throwing aside luggage, desperately searching for something none of us believed could possibly be there. By this point, airport security had been alerted to the disturbance. 2 officers arrived as Captain Mercer was attempting to force open a specialized pharmaceutical container, a sealed unit designed to maintain precise temperature and pressure for sensitive medical supplies. This particular container had been loaded by representatives from Nexelon Pharmaceuticals and was designated for direct transfer to their Boston research facility. Security officers Daniel Reed and Amara Osai approached Captain Mercer, attempting to de-escalate the situation. Body camera footage from Officer Reed shows a man in the throes of what appears to be an acute psychological episode. "Captain, you need to step away from the container," Officer Reed can be heard saying. "Whatever you think you heard on the flight, I assure you there is no baby in that cargo container." Mercer's response, captured clearly on the body camera, has become the focus of intense analysis by both psychological experts and those who believe something truly inexplicable occurred on Flight 2237. "He's in there," Mercer insisted, his voice breaking. "My son is in there. I heard him crying. The same cry I heard 30 years ago, the only time I ever heard him. Please, you have to believe me." What happened next would change the course of the investigation entirely. As security officers were attempting to calm Captain Mercer and lead him away from the cargo area, a representative from Nexelon Pharmaceuticals arrived to take custody of the specialized container. This representative, Dr. Eleanor Ruiz, appeared visibly agitated when she saw that Captain Mercer had been attempting to open the container. "What's going on here?" Dr. Ruiz demanded. "This container cannot be opened outside of a controlled environment. The contents are extremely sensitive." Officer Osei explained the situation, clearly expecting the pharmaceutical representative to confirm the impossibility of a human being inside the sealed container. Instead, according to both officers' statements and the body camera footage, Dr. Ruiz's reaction was unexpected and troubling. Who authorized this pilot to access this area? This container falls under proprietary protocols and is exempt from standard inspection procedures. She then made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones that the body camera barely captured. "We have a situation. The TAA pilot is here. Yes, that container. No, it hasn't been opened. Need immediate extraction." Within minutes, 3 men in unmarked black SUVs arrived at the cargo area, displaying credentials that Officer Reed would later describe as government-related but not any specific agency I recognized. These individuals took control of the pharmaceutical container and escorted Dr. Ruiz from the area, leaving Captain Mercer in the custody of airport security. The container was removed before anyone could verify whether Captain Mercer's impossible claim had any basis in reality. What might have been dismissed as the psychological break of an overworked pilot suddenly took on the contours of something far more sinister. In the days that followed, Captain Mercer was placed on administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. Transatlantic Airways issued a statement attributing the incident to crew fatigue and possible acoustic anomalies common in modern aircraft.
Nexalon Pharmaceuticals denied any irregularities with their cargo and insisted the container contained only temperature-sensitive biological research materials. But questions remained, questions that became increasingly difficult to dismiss. Why did multiple passengers and crew members, not just Captain Mercer, hear what sounded distinctly like an infant crying? Acoustic engineers who later examined the aircraft found no mechanical issues that could produce such sounds. Why did Dr. Ruiz react with such alarm to Captain Mercer's presence in the cargo area? Security footage shows her making 3 additional phone calls within 5 minutes of arriving, all while repeatedly checking the integrity of the container's seals. Why did Captain Mercer, a pilot with an impeccable 32-year record and no history of mental health issues, suddenly become convinced that his son, who would have been 30 years old, was somehow present as a newborn in the cargo hold? Most disturbing of all, why did Nexalon Pharmaceuticals abruptly shut down their Boston research facility just 4 days after the incident, transferring all personnel to undisclosed locations and removing all equipment under cover of darkness? The official investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board concluded that an unidentified acoustic anomaly had created sounds that mimicked human crying. Captain Mercer's reaction was attributed to acute stress disorder triggered by unresolved grief. The case was officially closed 3 months after the incident. But a parallel investigation, conducted by journalist Eliza Montgomery of the Boston Investigator, uncovered troubling connections that suggested something far more disturbing might have occurred on Flight 2237. Montgomery discovered that Nexalon Pharmaceuticals, while presenting itself as a conventional pharmaceutical company, was primarily funded by Department of Defense grants focused on biological temporal research. The company had been founded just 5 years earlier by former military scientists previously employed at classified research facilities. More disturbing still, Montgomery found that between 1990 and 1995, 17 infants had been reported deceased at hospitals across the southeastern United States under circumstances similar to what the Mercers experienced. Newborns taken for emergency procedures immediately after birth, the families, with records sealed by judicial order. In April 2023, 5 months after the incident, Captain Richard Mercer disappeared from his Atlanta home. His car was found at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, but security footage showed no evidence of him entering the terminal. Intensive searches yielded no results. He remains missing to this day. 3 weeks after Mercer's disappearance, journalist Eliza Montgomery received an unmarked package containing a single data drive. On this drive was a video file showing what appeared to be laboratory footage. The video, authenticated by digital forensics experts as unaltered, shows a sterile white room containing what looks like a large cylindrical chamber. The timestamp indicates the footage was recorded in 2022. In the video, researchers in hazmat suits open the chamber, revealing what unmistakably appears to be a newborn infant, alive and crying. The infant is quickly transferred to a specialized incubator. For just 3 seconds, the camera captures a clipboard attached to the chamber. Though partially obscured, the words Subject JM-1892 are clearly visible, along with what appears to be a birth date, March 17, 1992, the exact birth date of James Mercer, Captain Richard Mercer's supposedly deceased son. The video ends abruptly. 3 days after receiving it, Eliza Montgomery also disappeared. Her laptop and research files were missing from her apartment. The data drive containing the video was never found. Her case remains open, classified as a missing person by Boston police. Transatlantic Airways Flight 2237 continues to operate regular service between London and Boston. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner involved in the incident was returned to service after comprehensive mechanical inspection found no issues. Occasionally, passengers on this aircraft report hearing unusual sounds from the cargo hold. Sounds that some describe as mechanical and others describe, with evident discomfort, as almost like a baby crying. Nexalon Pharmaceuticals was quietly acquired by a private military contractor in January 2023 and no longer operates under that name. all records of their research have been sealed under national security provisions. And somewhere, perhaps, a child who should be 30 years old but somehow still exists as a newborn continues to cry, waiting for a father who recognized his sound across decades of separation and impossible science. The most disturbing aspect of this case isn't just the possibility that Captain Mercer actually heard his infant son crying in that cargo hold 30 years after his birth. It's the question of how many other deceased infants might have been taken for purposes we can scarcely imagine, their cries unheard by parents told they no longer existed. What would you do if you heard the impossible cry of someone you'd lost decades ago? And more importantly, how far would you go to find the truth if every institution, medical, governmental, scientific, seemed determined to convince you that what you experienced wasn't real? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more investigations into aviation incidents that mainstream sources won't touch. The truth is out there, often hidden in the cargo holds of our conventional reality, waiting for someone brave enough to open the container and face what's inside.